Hello and welcome to this lecture, and in this lecture we will go ahead and learn about adding the user's ability to add a particular food item selected over here to the database. So in the previous lecture we have actually created this particular model, which is the consume model, and now we wish to add some data, or we wish to add a functionality which allows user to add the food consumed over here into this particular model. So for that very purpose, what we need to do is that we need to go ahead and modify this form right here, and we need to be able to add a submit button right here. So let's quickly go ahead and do that. So I will go to the index.html file, and in here, first of all, you need to go into the form, and in here I just need to add a button. So I will say button, and in here the type of this thing is going to be submit. So that will actually add a submit button, and let's say you want to name this button as add, so I will add in here. However, the problem here is that we have not yet mentioned the type of method this form is going to use. So this form is going to actually post data, so the form method over here should actually be equal to post. So I will say form method equals, that's going to be post, and you don't need an action here, so I will get rid of this action right here. So now what this post method would do is that it will actually take the option value which is selected, and then it will go ahead and put that value up into our consume database or the consume model. So in order to go ahead and extract this value from this specific select box, you obviously need to go ahead and give this select box some sort of an ID, because we are going to make use of that ID and the name of this select box inside our view to get the data when the user clicks this particular submit button. So here let's go ahead and add in some sort of name. So I will say food underscore consumed as the name of the select box, and I will go ahead and make sure to use the same thing as the ID as well. So now once we have the name and the ID, and once we have a submit button, let's go back here and hit refresh. So as you can see, now I can select something and click on add, and now nothing happens here when I click on add. That's because we have not yet handled what happens when the user actually submits a post request. So now in order to handle the post request, we will go to the views.py file, which is this file right here, and in here, as you can see, now we do have the index view here, but this is not for the post request. This is just to go ahead and get the data. So now in order to handle the post request here, first of all, we'll go ahead and make sure if the incoming request is a post request. So in order to make sure if the incoming request is a post request, I will say if request.method, if this is equal to post, in that case what we want to do is that we want to actually get the data submitted by the user, and I'm missing a quotation here. So after adding that, I can now go ahead and first of all get the data which is submitted by the user, which is nothing but this option which is selected from this particular select menu or the select box. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. So I will say food underscore consumed. So I will get the food consumed here by saying request dot post. So that will actually give me the data from the post request. However, we don't want the entire data, but we only want the food consumed. So I will say food underscore consumed. So now I will have access to whatever value the user has selected. Now this will just give us the text name of the food item consumed. So remember that if you just go back here and if you select one of these items, this is not an actual object, but this is simply some plain text, which is nothing but the name of the food item. So even if I click add up over here, what technically happens is that this particular thing will only give us the name and not an actual food object. So try to understand the difference here, the difference between just the name and just the food object. What we want is the food object. However, this thing right here is only the name. So how would you get an actual object from this name? So in order to get an actual object, which is the food object from its name, we need to go ahead and write in another query here. So you need to do something like food, which is nothing but the model. So from the food model, you want to get an object. So I will say food.objects.get, and in here to this particular get, I will pass in that I want the name of this object to be equal to the name which we just got. So the name which we just got from this particular post request is currently saved in food consumed. So I will simply go ahead and just make sure to get that name and pass it in over here. So what this will do is that it will actually take that name value, and out of all the food objects, it will select only that object whose name is actually the name which the user has selected over here. So that means if I select oats over here, and if I click on add, so technically what happens is that if I go back to my code, I will only get oats over here. So oats is not an object, it's simply some plain text. However, to get the actual oats object from the food model, we have this query right over here, which is food.objects.get, and it will get that particular object whose name is oats. So now once we have this particular object, you do need to save it into something. So I will save it into something like consume. So I will say consume equals the food consumed. So now in consume, we actually have an object and not just the name. So I hope that this actually clears up your confusion. We now have the food object. However, if you take a look at our model, which is this model right here, we don't just want the food consumed object, but we also want the user object as well. So now how exactly can we go ahead and get the user? So when the user actually adds something to this particular model, which is the consume model, we usually want to go ahead and add it to a user who's currently logged in. So let's say, for example, currently we have a super user. So now if the super user is logged in, we actually want to get super user and add this food object to the consumption list of that super user. So getting the current user is actually quite simple. You just go ahead and say request.user, and that will give you the user who's currently logged in. So I will save this thing into something called as user. Okay, so now once we have the user, that is the user object, and once we also have the food object as well, now I can actually go ahead and construct an object of the type consume, which is nothing but of the type of this model consume right over here, so that we can add that object to the table consume. So now let's head back to the views, and I will say consume. So this will be the object name, and the object is going to be of the type consume, and to this particular consume object we'll pass in user as the user and food consumed as nothing but this consume right here. So I will say this equals consume. Okay, so now once the object is created, we now simply need to go ahead and save that object. So I will say consume.save, and once the object is saved, we are pretty much good to go. So this is what happens when the request method is post. However, if you take a look at this code, this particular code will now be a part of the else block. So I will say else, this would happen, which is it will get all the food items and it will display them up in the select box. However, this part is going to remain outside. Now, one more thing which you need to do here is that you can either exclude this out of the else block, and the reason for that is because even if you actually go ahead and select one item and click on add, you would still want access to these items right over here. So for that very purpose, I will actually place it inside the else block. However, I will also copy this line of code and paste it inside the if block as well. That means even if the if block executes or the else block execute, we will always want these items. And if you don't have this particular line of code here, what would happen is that if you just submit a post request, then there would be no food object remaining to be passed up over here. So that's one thing which you need to remember. Okay, so now once we are done with this, let's see if this thing would work. So first of all, you do need to make sure that you're logged in as an admin. So yeah, I'm logged in as an admin. So currently if I go to consumes, I have 2 objects. So let me delete those objects first so that we are sure that we are able to add the items via form. So now let's actually go ahead, go to the home page. Let's select a brown bread, and when I click on add, okay, it says consume is not defined. That should be a minor error. So it's at line number 10. So yeah, we have this error because we have not imported the consume model. So let me just go ahead and do that real quick. And now just make sure that you don't refresh this, but instead you visit the URL. And now let's select brown bread, and when I click on add, as you can see, the page refreshed, and now we need to make sure that it is added by going into the admin panel. So if I go to consumes, as you can see, we have the consume object 3, and if I open this thing up, I will actually have the brown bread, which is being added by this user right here. So that means we are now actually able to add a food item along with a particular user to this particular form which we have on our index page. So that's it for this lecture. And now in the upcoming lecture, what we will do is that we will actually go ahead and create a table that will list out all the user consumption activity on this particular index page. So this index page should now also display the items which are actually consumed by this specific user. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.